عليكم everybody. عظم الله أجورنا وأجوركم بمصابي أبي عبد الله الحسين and the أهل البيت, and during these blessed days of شهر Muharram leading up to شهر Safar. I think we're already into it, are we? Almost,
Yeah.
yes?
Yeah.
Alhamdulillah. How are you doing? How's everybody else doing?
It's great. Everyone's great. Alhamdulillah. So we're just going to quickly begin with it. Sorry, everybody, for the delay that we hadn't started on time. So today we're going to be speaking on mental health and how, as a youth, we're tackled with different situations that, we're unable to overcome because of our lack of knowledge. So inshallah, today Sister Berak is going to expand our perspectives and teach us more about mental health and how we can, during the month of Muharram, revive our mental well-being, inshallah. So the first question that we have is that due to the pandemic, the deaths, the injustice around the world, it tends to take a huge toll on our mental health. We then decide to distract ourselves, whether it be through eating, watching excessive TV shows, or any other coping mechanism. There comes a point where we start realizing that we're wasting our time, and from an Islamic perspective as well, that is not recommended. Now, I get that we should take care of ourselves through the time that we have, but there comes a time where these distractions, they become addicting. So even when we don't, even if we're not feeling low, it just becomes addicting to a point where we're continuously, wasting our time excessively. So the question is that what is the line between self-care and self-sabotage? You think that you're taking care of yourself, but in the long term, it's affecting you negatively. So what do you have to say for that?
I'm just waiting for the camera to open up again.
Yeah, all right.
So, okay, so I'll begin speaking even if the camera is not on. Do you want to turn it on there? I'm not sure why it's not opening here.
All right, let me see.
I think there we are.
All right, yeah.
All right. It is important to understand that it's normal to have challenges in our lives when it comes, whether you're in school, whether you're done school, whether you're trying to figure out what to do after that, or what path in your career you want to go, what kind of job that you want to do, perhaps looking at partners to marry, if you have children after that. Just every stage of life, we're going to be experiencing all these different challenges, and you could look at it as a point of view in terms of distractions. You can take a look at it in terms of things that can impact your overall mental health and your well-being. So your question is, you said that you think you're taking care of yourself, but in the long term, it's affecting you negatively. So what do I have to say about that? Again, it comes down to understanding that it's a normal thing that we experience in our life, whether we get it in the form of distractions, whether we get challenges in every stage of our life. Some of us, especially with what we're going through the last a few months, is definitely things that we've not experienced in our lifetime, not to this degree, to the point where it's impacting us on so many levels, to the point where people have lost their lives, to the point where we don't know how to deal with that loss of job, lots of financial instability. We're looking at the way that we're interacting and connecting with people. We're looking at how we've had a different Ramadan, Shahr Ramadan. We've looked at how in Muharram, we looked at how we've done majalis. Some centers have opted to doing majalis strictly online, and other places have taken creative ways of implementing the majalis. Like if you look at some places in New Jersey, for example, you look at places like in Allentown, they did a drive-through. In Manchester, IUS over there, they did an incredible, a huge drive-through majlis. In Toronto, there's another city that did that, and in other many places. Centers have, in their own small centers, have done that as well, where they have done majalis using these pandemic measures, keeping distance, wearing masks. Alhamdulillah, we've successfully come through it. Some people have not followed the rules and in the sense, and didn't adhere to it, using the mentality that Imam Hussain will protect us, which is good in some level, but in other levels, when you're dealing with a contagious illness, faith is not going to help you. It's the physical measures in place that is going to help protect you, right? So yeah. You've noticed that we've gone through all of these different challenges, and we've figured out along the way, as human beings, we have the natural ability to adjust. We have a lot of resilience, subhanAllah. if we choose to look at things that way. If we're constantly looking as problems, as negative and heavy and very challenging in that sense, that negative mindset will have a very negative output as well. The outcome of such a negative thought pattern will, of course, contribute to you having negative views and perspectives on things. And it's almost a self-fulfilling prophecy, so to speak, right? So definitely we have to have that resilient, positive attitude. Resilience in itself. Sometimes it's hard to stay happy and positive in a difficult situation. But then when we're looking at the themes during the 10 to 13 days that we did during Muharram, what do we learn from those days that we can apply for the rest of the year? When we listen to what Sayyidah Zainab said in the face of what she had to go through, the trauma, the atrocities, the injustice, the tyranny, and she still came out at the end saying, I see nothing but beauty. That is an incredible source of inspiration for us in the face of our own challenges that we can apply, that despite the challenges that we have, we still choose. She chose to see beauty, right? From a psychological perspective, this is what we talk about reframing. This is what we talk about keeping strength in the face of very difficult situations, right? So when you say, what do I have to say about that? There's a lot to say about that. It's all how you choose to look at things. And I'm not disregarding the fact that it's tough in difficult situations where you can't just say, just be positive. I'm not saying be positive. I'm saying, tafa'alu bil khair tajiduh, which is what the Prophet is saying, right? So exude that positivity out there and keep hopeful. You will find it, right? And using these sources of inspiration to empower us to get through these challenges that we go through, right? There is a difference between self-care and self-sabotage. Self-care is giving yourself time off, so to speak, right? Empowering yourself, filling up that empty cup of water that you have, filling it up again. Filling it up means what? Perhaps you need to sleep. Perhaps you need to watch a funny movie. Perhaps you need to go for a nature walk. Perhaps you need to have some deep spiritual time with God. Perhaps you need to go exercise. Perhaps you need to get your nails done. Why not, right? But halal colors and prayers and all that kind of stuff. Keep in mind, I don't mean like flaunt your beauty out there, but just getting a nice manicure or a massage can really rejuvenate yourself, right? So rejuvenation for self-care can be so many different things as long as it's healthy and halal, of course, right?
Yes.
So self-sabotage, I would say, is completely disregarding the things that you need to do. And it could be related to perhaps you being severely depressed or anxious or struggling with a mental illness. So it's important to understand that. But if you're constantly in that negative mind frame, constantly allowing yourself to go down that route, here in North America, we call this type of person a Debbie Downer, always putting a dark cloud over difficult situations, that's not going to help you get through. So it's really important to understand the yomun ilkum and yomun alaykum, what Imam Ali says, one day is for you, one day is against you. When it's for you, hey, use that energy, do the best that you can, reach your full potential. And when it's against you, you know what? Give yourself permission and say it's okay. You need a downtime. I learned from a sheikh a few years ago, somebody asked a question about spirituality, and I loved what they asked in terms of, are we always on this constant high? Like, what's happening with that? And no, you're not on a constant high. It's okay to have highs and lows. Our spirituality is always, and our spirit's always in that high and low. So you're not always on a high to God like this. It is a journey up and down, and you're allowed. It's okay. Give yourself that permission. But self-sabotage doesn't mean to continuously continue on that line of negativity, or not taking care of your health, not taking care of your diet and exercise and sleep, etc. So there has to be a healthy balance when it comes to self-care, rejuvenating yourself, but also being positive and realistic and reframing the challenges that you go through, because every phase of life, you're going to be encountering challenges.
All right, that's a really perfect response. So now, sometimes for some people, these distractions come in the form of, avoiding toxic parents, right? So when they don't seem to understand you, maybe because they have too much going on in their own, in their own lives. So how do we deal with that situation, right? How do we juggle family responsibilities with work, as well as knowing where to draw the line? Basically, like having healthy boundaries within family relationships. So what do you have to say about how do we have a healthy relationship between families? balancing work and stuff.
Yeah, it's definitely something we see a lot more happening in our community these days, the family dynamics of being dysfunctional. And I think it has to do a lot with the type of social interactions and influences that we have around us compared to what our parents and their parents, their generations had. It's quite different than what we are experiencing these days, right? So it does start with the family in terms of the parents. What kind of foundation do they want to build in the home? When you have, and I know as youth and young women and even still those who have moved out of the family home and into their own home, it truly is important to create that dynamic. Now, if the family function of the home is already dysfunctional, it becomes really hard to change your parents, right? Or influence them, or it's really hard to change old habits, so to speak. But it does come down to our basic roots in our faith. There's a lecture I did in the Muharram series. I'm trying to remember which one it was. The parenting lecture. I highly recommend for you to check that lecture out, where I talk about a lot of these things. So it's a full lecture. I don't have time to go through it all today, but essentially to understand the Islamic perspective of how to raise children. And I compared it to some more modern Western psychological theories, and they're very similar. They complement each other, although the Islamic is the base, right? And so this goes into detail. I mean, we're not born into knowing how to do this, except for certain instinctual things that we do know. It is important to learn these things, and especially because it's not a cookie cutter approach. Every family is different. Our genetics, our culture, our language, our own individual family culture and influences are going to impact us and how we're going to have the type of relationships, healthy relationships. The key thing when we're looking at basics is respect, communication. If parents today want to have healthy relationships with their kids, need to understand the form of communication that kids are using these days. Yes, it is through social media and technology, but at the same time, we want to create healthy relationships where we feel comfortable communicating with each other and talking about things that are taboo or awkward or strange. For example, as young women, we need to understand our sexuality. We need to understand our sexual function. We need to understand our body, basic sexual education, right? We need to understand these things. And I know in different cultures within our Muslim culture, these are kind of difficult to talk about and taboo and weird, right? Like embarrassing. But there's nothing embarrassing about that. It's normal. It's our bodies. It's what God gave us. We need to learn about these things. Otherwise, what's going to happen? Our young girls are going to be learning this off of what you have accessible through social media, our other peers outside of our communities, and you're going to be learning things the wrong way, right? And if we look at the Muslim Youth Helpline in the UK, which is a great resource for people to access if you need to talk to a counselor, kind of like a distress call line. When they did research on this a while back, they found that there's been an increase in use of pornography from women. Not men, women. Why? Why do you say? And the reason is because of the lack of proper sexual education for our young women. So they go to unrealistic and unhealthy ways of learning about it, and they have now become addicted. And this impacts women and men once you get into a marital relationship, because they're absolutely unrealistic expectations. And it can really impact the relationship, right? So these are things that our parents, our mothers need to talk to our girls, our fathers need to talk to the sons, and we take control of that narrative. Otherwise, our kids, you're going to learn about this elsewhere easily from other people and in ways that are not healthy and most likely un-Islamic, which we want to have more control over. I know here in North America, and I know in the UK as well, there was a big issues around that years ago, where the sexual education became mandatory in the educational system, and a lot of Muslim parents took their kids out of public school and threw them in private schools, whether they're Sunni or Shia, they didn't care as long as they're in Muslim school, because we had more control over how we taught our kids that. Now there's been a shift again with the different governments, but the idea again is that we need to take control of that narrative. How? Again, it's by creating that communication. Now, as a young parent myself, I'm very cognizant of that. What I try to do with my daughter is I'm learning from my elders before me, learning from research and our faith and psychology as well, and well-being in terms of how to parent. I try to combine all as best as I can, especially when it comes to hijab, right? I'm really open with my daughter and talk to her and explain things to her, and very trying to be age appropriate as well, right? But creating the love for the Ahl al-Bayt, for example, creating love for salah and prayer and our rituals and spirituality, and of course hijab as well, teaching her young, you know, to cover properly, and you know, things like very small things, but just teaching along the way. Even before she wore hijab, I'd get her modest clothing. So if she were to wear a bathing suit, it would be a t-shirt and knee length type of shorts, right? Or if she wore a dress, if it was a spaghetti strap, she would wear a t-shirt underneath, or modesty shorts under, things like that. So she learned to cover herself even before she came to the age. I think that's a lot of challenges that parents do, is when the child, they're like, oh, they're a kid, let them dress this way. And then boom, as soon as they hit that age, right before 9 o'clock, 9 years old, not 9 o'clock, wear the hijab. But how does that work? You cannot expect a child who's been running around half naked to fully cover up. It just doesn't work. You have to do it in stages. This is what I love about the Islamic model of parenting and the stages of development that the Prophet and Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq discuss, alayhi wassalam, is because it's about stages of development, and in each stage what to do and how to interact with the child. This is important for youth as well to read this, because then you can understand perhaps why your parents do certain things and how they do it, because they're following, inshallah, they're following this model. The key thing when it comes to our relationships with our parents is that communication. I recall my mother doing this with me when I was a teenager. Till now, she successfully knows everything about me and my secrets, so to speak. And the reason being is how she used to do it. So normal, at the age of 13, 14, 15, 16, we start noticing the opposite gender. We start, and part of our hormonal development, absolutely normal, natural, and beautiful. We need to understand this in a healthy way. So I came to my mother. I remember one time I mentioned something about a male. She didn't punish me. She didn't came out and said haram, or like none of that. I wasn't doing anything haram, but this is the response of our parents usually. She didn't do that. She engaged in a conversation with me. She heard everything. She made me feel safe sharing this with her. In her own way, she would come back and re-educate me how to interact with the opposite gender, how to speak, how to talk, right away. And instead of what parents do, haram, you can't do that, you cannot breathe the air around the opposite gender. That's my dad's view. Bless him, very traditional. But realistically, we have males around us, whether it's in the home, whether it's at work, whether it's at school, so we have to learn how to have appropriate, modest interaction with the opposite gender. And again, it comes from the home, our parents. We need to learn this. So as young parents out there, you know, there's a lot to learn in terms of how to communicate with your kids in a healthy way, building trust. I do a lot of workshops with youth and parents on this topic, and it comes down to it again and again and again. Why don't you trust us? The youth say. The parents say, it's not that we don't trust you, we do not trust the environment around you. And I come back and say, well, it is your upbringing that is being embedded in this child that you're putting out into the society. Trust your upbringing, especially if you have healthy relations with your children and where there is back and forth. Now, this is obviously idealistic talk at the same time. I recognize that, because not all families have this type of relationship. For those who are in difficult situations, it's important to acknowledge and validate that. For those who are in difficult situations with your parents, I feel for you. And I am sorry that you are experiencing that. And there comes a point where we truly have to try to communicate with our families and use, if they're very traditional Islamic, okay, go back to religion and bring it into the conversation. You know, there are things that you want to do, you want to study. And sometimes it is a matter of being patient until you move away for work or school or even get married. But do not fall into the trap of wanting to get away from your family by marrying. Most women end up in worse situations. So key thing again, communication. Sometimes if it's too difficult, perhaps you can get an auntie or uncle or a community member, go talk to them that you can trust, who can come and intervene and speak and connect with your family. And now, this is different from abusive situations, of course. When we're talking about abuse, that is completely different. And that is something perhaps we can talk about another time. You can definitely go on YouTube or check out my other social media where I've talked about abuse in the household. And it's a serious topic that we can look at another time.
All right, Jazakallah for that. Now, with stress, right, there comes uncertainty. So, right now as well, we're always in a constant state of uncertainty. And, how do we live knowing that our future is unclear? Because, see, we ultimately know that, Allah is in charge and whatever He decides for us is the best. But, how should we be ready for His challenges? How should we be ready for, everything that comes in our way? Because right now as well, right, we don't know what's going to happen next, and that causes stress, fear. So how do we deal with uncertainty, the anxiety part of uncertainty as well?
Again, when it comes to anxiety about the future, we have tools as Muslims how to work with that. And from a therapeutic point of view, I always talk to clients and people in the perspective of He plans for us. We do the best that we can moving forward in that plan, right? But plan ahead. Do not worry ahead. A lot of people worry ahead. And I think that's the mistake, the error that we do. We worry ahead. This is where anxiety comes in. So anxiety is the fear of not knowing what's going to happen in the future, right? And constantly ruminating over these types of things. Fear is what we can see, right? So when you see something, for example, spider, then you know what to do. You're going to run away, scream, or try to destroy the poor thing, right? And the thoughts about what's going to happen in the future, of course, is quite daunting. And it can really take over in terms of the stress that it can take on our health and how to manage that. So when it comes through these types of uncertainties, it's easy to say, trust Allah, do dua, read Quran. This is the standard we hear when it comes to anything, when it comes to depression, anxiety, and all of these types of challenges, right? So it's important to understand that, again, from our perspective that we deal with, there is that idea that tawakkul ala Allah, right? To put your trust in God subhanahu wa ta'ala. I know people who tend to like having control over things, this is not an easy thing to do in terms of putting trust elsewhere. And when we look at like an Islamic perspective type of thing, or just when we were looking at anxiety in general and how to work through it, there's a variety of different things that you can do. So first and foremost, definitely work on the plan that you have. Look at what it is that you want to be doing moving forward, whether it's goals in school, career path, marriage plans, anything like that. Those of you who have children, plans for your children, because it's constantly changing, especially now the pandemic. I mean, right now we have reports saying that perhaps school is going to get canceled again. We're going to have another lockdown. And just now we just started to breathe and whatnot. So we have to learn how to be flexible and go with the flow of these challenges. Usually we have this high resiliency and flexibility, and those who are always stuck on, no, it has to be, a certain way, that can be quite harmful for us. Being that kind of attitude of black and white, it has to be a certain way. That is very damaging in the sense that you're not going to be very flexible to go with the flow with these challenges. So it's really important to understand how to go with the flow of things, right? And when you look at tawakkul, and again, I use this a lot, is plan ahead. Don't worry ahead. Leave the rest to Him. And so you see, when you do this, what are you doing also? What are you doing when you do this? Yeah, it's a form of dua as well, right? Yeah, it's beautiful. It's very spiritual that way, right? So you plan ahead and leave the rest to Him, right? Leave the rest to Him. And go about what you need to do. Take the precautions that you need to do. So if you are experiencing severe anxiety, you definitely need to talk to a doctor or a counselor. Perhaps medication can help lower the intensity of the racing thoughts. Talking to a counselor can also help you process things, and looking at other strategies, breathing techniques, looking at how you're eating, exercise, sleep. All of these things combined together can help deal with stress in an effective way, and also work with anxiety as well.
All right. Okay. So now speaking of stress as well, it also, as you said, it takes a huge toll on our mental health. And the what ifs, the whys, and everything, it causes hopelessness as well. So not just this, but other negative emotions as well. When we don't know how to deal with the negative emotions, it causes stress. Now, how do we deal with stress with mindfulness through meditation. Be in touch with ourselves. The stress can get stored in our body and, our nervous system too. So how do we regulate our nervous system to express and manage stress effectively and get out of the negative thinking pattern?
So I've done whole workshops on this, which I cannot do in 5 minutes right now.
Yeah.
But essentially what we want to take a look at here is an understanding of how you deal with stress. If you just Google my name and stress management, or just trying to remember the exact titles, you're going to see a variety of workshops I've done in the past where I get into actual full details. So you need to understand how you respond to stress. Some people respond to stress very differently than others. Some overeat, undereat, undersleep, oversleep, fatigue, bad hygiene, or some people just, again, very different. So you need to understand how you respond to stress. And then afterwards, with that understanding, then you can take away different pathways rather to how to tackle that stress. Most of the time, like I said, it is looking at healthy eating, healthy sleeping, and exercise, getting rid of toxicity around you, spirituality. These are the basics. If one of these things are off and you're hit with a difficult situation, you're more likely to not deal with that situation properly. But if you focus on trying to manage these things, and this helps also with the previous question where we talked about control, and so I just want to bring that up again. Ultimately, you have to understand that you don't have control over these things that happen around. Like everything, if anything, this pandemic has taught us, we do not have control, but we need to learn how to take control over the things we do have control over, such as these basic stress management strategies. So please do look up the full workshops that I've done on stress management. They're very detailed. And at the end of those workshops, I do a mindfulness meditation with different strategies using visualization, using body relaxation techniques, so muscle tension and relaxation. Also, breathing. Breathing can really help. Different techniques of breathing. So breathing in through your nose, counting up to 7, holding your breath, and then releasing through your mouth. What this does, it gets oxygen where it needs to go into your system. It slows down your heart rate. And it's a great way of rebalancing yourself. Because when you do that, especially if you do it outside in nature and oxygen, and a lot of studies have shown this, including some research done at our university where I work, where people who spend the day out hiking and walking and just immersing themselves in nature tend to be more relaxed and their stress levels go down than those people who are not doing that per se. So the study actually was fascinating. It took students where they did a whole day outside on a trip, on a field trip. They spent the whole day in nature outside. Those same students went to a museum locally here in Ottawa. And so what they found, that the students who immersed themselves in the day trip outside tended to be more cooperative and friendly, less aggression, and more relaxed than those students who spent it indoor in a museum. So, and more happy. And it was a study based on happiness, but it linked it to stress management as well. So whenever you're feeling stressed, whenever you are feeling overwhelmed, take a moment, do some breathing techniques. Check out, there's so many on YouTube that you can find, but the ones that I've done, you'll find it at the end as well of the videos. And do some deep breathing relaxation. I liked listening to my favorite du'as, reciters, or latmiyas that are very soothing, things like that. There's also some really nice relaxation, spiritual sounds that you can listen to with nature. Now, if you have the ability to go outside in nature, I know in the Emirates where you ladies are, there is beautiful nature in different parts. Although it's synthetic, right?
Yeah.
But you do have lots of scenery, beautiful scenery in different parts as well. Take advantage of that when it's not too hot, of course, and engage yourself. Perhaps, inshallah, once the pandemic is lifted, maybe we can do events together. Excuse me. And we can do meditation on the beach. I actually have had plans with some ladies in the Emirates to do retreats, but of course that's not going to happen this year. We've had to postpone it. Excuse me.
That's all right. Okay, that's a really great point, connected to the nature and to, if we're not physically in the environment of nature, we can obviously search YouTube videos on this. So now how well do you think our mental health is linked to our physical health? Like, does the state of our mental health affect how we are physically? What do you have to say about that?
There is definitely a huge link between the two, just like we were saying earlier. What happens when you get stressed is there is a buildup of stress hormones within your body. These cortisol hormones have nowhere to go. They stay coursing around in your body and they need an outlet. What happens when you exercise is that you're releasing these impactful, stressful hormones, meaning when you exercise, endorphins and adrenaline is released into your system and these stress hormones are gone, which is why you feel so great after a run, a workout, dance, or whatever form of physical activity you engage in. You feel good, there's a high. It's because of these endorphins into your system. We call them happy hormones. So this is part of treatment that I engage it with and prescribe to my clients in terms of an action plan, not prescribed as a medication for a doctor. I can't do that, but how we get the chance to, when we engage in this physical activity, it's part of the action plan that we put forward for people to start feeling better about themselves. So exercising, walking, eating well, et cetera, et cetera. So it's vital. And it's also prescribed in our sunnah, you could say, where the Ahlul Bayt and the Prophet talked about swimming, talked about archery, talked about horseback riding, right? And these were basic skills that was needed back in the tribal warrior days, so to speak. But if you notice, these are things that even today can be quite impactful for us in our daily lives, right? And they become very popular. A lot of young men and women have taken up these activities as part of their well-being, as part of their balance, as part of their taking care of themselves, but also being mindful in terms of the prophetic traditions, athleticism, I guess you could say here, right? So it's really important to have that in your life. And I myself engage in that quite often. I used to be a very regular gym goer until, of course, COVID hit. And that was very challenging. And I was one of those people very distraught during the time of not being able to go to my gym. And it was hard at the time to find different ways of engaging with it because we couldn't go outside as much, right? It was very hard to do it at home as well because we were all going through this transition. Alhamdulillah, the gyms at our end here opened up again with measures in place. I was able to engage with that. But even before that, became engaged, got a bike. My daughter and I would go biking. We'd go play soccer behind our house. There's an awesome soccer field in the summer. So we enjoyed and took advantage of that. And it's so important to have that. And I found that during this time, especially stir crazy, you know, it's hard to do that. There's also been a huge rise in online exercise with different workout folks coming up with routines to engage in. So I highly recommend people to check out people that different, you could say, different channels, of people doing things. There's one in particular that I really enjoyed following. It's sometimes you can become intimidated or you don't feel like it. There's no motivation. It's not the same as going to the gym or engaging with other people doing activities, right? So then you have to think about it. This is something that was recommended for us to do as part of our traditions, Islamic traditions as well, is having that overall well-being. And it's included in physical activity, right? We have to be physically prepared for the imam of our time. All right, I was reading something earlier about the 313 and who are the 313 and what characteristics, along, of course, with the spiritual and the religious and these types of good characters that are required. The physical aspect was one that I was reading about, and I found that fascinating because, again, you need to have physical fitness for these warriors, for the imam, and as women as well, right? And also, if you think about it, as young women who are heading into marriage, or some of us already have kids, that fitness is vital so that we can upkeep with the challenges and take care of our stressors in our lives, right? And our young kids who are looking up to us. And a friend of mine in England who's a personal trainer, her name is Husna Rida. MashaAllah, she has been an incredible person in the community where she gives training lessons to women. She will go to their home. She will go to their homes and do training with them. That's changed a bit over the pandemic, but women lifting women, and we have all these amazing trainers in our communities. And so physical fitness is so important. Now, I don't agree with a lot of videos out there perhaps of women in hijab and in questionable tight clothing performing these exercises. I don't necessarily agree with that. I love the concept of fitness and being healthy, but showing off our body in tight clothing and muscles, and showing different parts of our body, that kind of defeats the purpose of modesty, I would say. It's modest in the sense that it's covered, but it's tight. You can still see parts of the body. And perhaps engaging in activities that don't really show modesty in certain body movements. Yes, the intention is exercise, but at the same time, when you show that publicly, it mimics other things that, sensual things and private things. So you got to be careful in terms of how we also show this out there. I'm very careful and very conscious of how I dress when I go exercise. If I know there are going to be other people around, I'm not comfortable exercising in front of men and males. Although for a long time, we didn't have women gyms here. And so what I would do is I would go to the mixed gyms, dress a certain way, but I would go at times when I know there was little traffic and hardly anybody around. Alhamdulillah, when the women gyms opened up and they had women's sections, I was one of the first people to go to that. And I took advantage of that. So we have to be conscious again. We want to be healthy. And by the way, in Dubai, oh my goodness, the women's, what's it called? The women's club? What's it called? I forget the name. Dubai, do you know what I'm talking about?
They have a health club here. They have actually here, there's a lot of things for women, like specifically for women as well. So we have a lot of health clubs here for women.
Ladies club. Dubai's ladies club.
Yeah,
I've actually been there. I've been there. They have a private beach. There. They also have full gym. There's pools, indoors. I loved it. And it was all private for women. I was able to take off my hijab. It was my friend's wedding back then when I went with her, and she was using the spa services. And I walked and she goes, "You can go to the beach." I'm like, "What?" She goes, "You can go to the beach." Like, oh my goodness. And I went there and took off my hijab in the area. I just absolutely beautiful. So you're very lucky in some countries and some places they have these full private. Take full advantage of them, my sisters. Those of us in the West, we don't have the same kind of luxuries like that. We do have different places such as women gyms and pools, and take full advantage of that. This is your self-care to rejuvenate yourself. And when you reframe this in the form of you taking care of yourself physically, all right, emotionally, spiritually, you're doing this for the Imam. You want to be fit, mind, body, and soul for the Imam, all aspects of your life. You see how important that is?
Yeah, inshallah. Jazakallah for that. So there are a few questions on the chat box as well.
Yeah, just noticed. Yeah, mashallah.
Yeah, mashallah. So one girl has asked, if someone's going through a mental breakdown, how can we help them using Islamically recommended methods? And are any of the methods scientifically proven to work? Yeah.
So there are, when we talk about Islamic methods, I've done a full research on this in my studies, and I've presented this. Again, I would recommend, I don't have time to go through all of it right now. Please do look up the, I don't know, I forget if it's on my channel, but definitely put in my name and Islamic counseling. So I did a full research on Islamic psychology and counseling methods for treatment and practice. And I looked at different methods of our tradition in terms of how it can be used for healing. Basic stuff we all know, such as, and I know you've heard this before, but I'm going to explain it in a different way. And again, I encourage you to listen to the full lecture because it gets into explicit detail and it will make you look at things differently, right? So the basic stuff we all know about, yes, reading the Quran, reading du'as, prayers, and all of these. These are part of our daily things, but I think we've gotten so used to them, we don't look at them as healing methods anymore. We just look at them things we need to do. So I invite you to look at that full lecture to answer part of that question. Now, when it comes to research and confirming, so to speak, what we have in our tradition from 1400 years ago to help with our psychology and mental health, absolutely. Research confirms, when you look at faith-based research, whether it's Islamic or even Christian and different faiths, that when you have faith as one of the common and biggest factor in your lives to help, people tend to be more calmer. They tend to have a better sense of well-being, and it does impact your well-being. Okay, so when you have these in your life, absolutely. When we talk about specific methods, there's so much. I don't have time to go through all of them, but definitely through the counseling therapeutic process, and especially if you are working with a counselor who is either Muslim, even not Muslim, but understands spirituality and religion in terms of therapeutic ways of helping you, it can really impact you through that process, because it's the language that you use in therapy, right? Tawakkul, an action plan in terms of including spirituality and religion as part of the action plan. It's the words that we use in therapy, I find, that will have a huge influence, and the core concept. So when we look at Islamic counseling or psychological concepts, we look at the nafs, we look at the different parts of the self. If you look at one of the lectures I did during Muharram, trying to remember which one it was. I think it was the lecture on acceptance and motivation, perhaps, if you look at one of those. And that's all on my YouTube. There's a whole playlist for the Muharram lecture. I look at that concept of the self, right? And it's 3 phases or parts, and it's described in the Quran. And this is something, again, part of the self that is in constant battle. You've heard this in a lot of lectures from different alimas and sheikhs. I put the psychological spin on it and compare it to Western theories of psychology in terms of how we struggle with ourselves and how this self has different levels. If you look at it from Abraham Maslow, who is a psychologist who talked about self-actualization and how you need to have certain levels of needs met before you can get to this level of self-actualization. That's pretty interesting. And he goes a step further when he connects spirituality and religion, which is something we connect with as Muslims, right? Yeah. So it's quite dynamic, and you can't answer it in one answer like that, right? But it's definitely something, and I commend the person who brought this up. We can definitely explore this further, but I do recommend you check out the different lectures I've done on this topic, and especially the one on Islamic counseling theories and practice, because it's quite detailed when it comes to that. And like I said, research does show. Back then when I did this research, we did not have the resources we do have today, mashallah. Now we have full conferences, full journals, professionals more in the field who are doing actual research on the topic, and so much out there that people are getting deep in to answer such questions. Back then I had to use loosely translated books, really badly translated books. I did a lot of qualitative type of research where I spoke with different scholars and alimas about these discussions and tried to come up with a kind of like a model of different theories that we have from an Islamic perspective and compared them to the Western perspective of psychology, and they're very similar when it comes to the self. We looked at behavior change and motivation. One of the models I use in my practice is highly influenced by Mullah Kashani, where he kind of redid the theories presented by Imam al-Ghazali, so from a Shia perspective. And he looked at this model of behavior where it's kind of like a contract, a circular contract with yourself, where you start off with the self of what is your goal. And if you look at that lecture that I did on where I discussed the self, again, I forget which one it was. I think it was acceptance or motivation of youth. It takes a look at this model, and you'll see it in the video, where you're making a contract with yourself, and you are going through that observation, okay, of making a contract, the shart, as we say in Arabic, and then afterwards working through the jihad an-nafs, the struggle of the self, and contemplation, and then looking at if you successfully got to that goal, and if not, to kind of put a consequence of yourself to strengthen yourself and work again on that. So if there's a goal, that's something you want to work on, a behavior, a negative behavior you want to change, or a thought pattern, this model can work really nicely. So again, I invite you to look at that lecture because it goes into detail how to do that. And it's something that a lot of scholars actually talk about in their different lectures. Again, I talk about it from a psychological, mental health, well-being point of view, but it's definitely something that is embedded within our own faith. I always talk about how the Prophet says, again, tafa'alu bil khair tajidu, be hopeful, have that positivity, put it out there, you will find it. This is the essence of what we call today positive psychology, right? And it's about putting that thought and working on it out there. A simple example you could do, and I've said this in talks before, is the idea of testing the power of positivity versus negative thoughts. So if you have somebody in front of you, you could try this right now or even after, is you have somebody lay down on the floor and tell them to think about negative things, okay? While they're thinking negative thoughts, they're feeling the emotions and whatnot. And then when you lift up their foot, you'll notice their foot is very heavy and it's rigid. And then you switch over the thoughts to positive, joyful, happiness as they're thinking it. You lift up the foot and you notice how easy and light it is to lift it up. It's not magic. It's psychology and science and spirituality and religion. The idea here is that positivity will make you feel a certain way physically. SubhanAllah. And then the negative thoughts, when you immerse yourself in this negative thought pattern, lifting up your foot will be heavy because of how heavy you feel. Weighed down, actually weighed down. So it's amazing to see how a simple thing, and I learned this from a fellow colleague, and I loved seeing it. And I've actually done that in talks in front of hundreds of people. They're like, oh wow, this looks like magic. I'm like, no, it's not magic. It's exactly the concept of positive psychology that our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam put out for us.
Right, Jazakallah, that was very beautiful. SubhanAllah. So we have two questions that are similar. One person said, how do we tell someone that they should take professional help on their mental health based on their behavioral patterns noticed over a long period of time? And something similar is, how would one communicate with a brother, son, spouse brought up in a toxic culture, one that doesn't prioritize mental well-being, who may be struggling with mental ailments? So, how do we bring about this conversation, and how do we tell them to, seek help in that situation?
It's not as simple as, hey, looks like you've got a cough or you're fainting, maybe we should go to the doctor type of thing. It requires a little bit more sophisticated technique around compassion, because the person you may go to and say, hey, you look depressed, is not going to be very receptive perhaps to such an approach. When you approach it with compassion, meaning, hey, let's go for a coffee, or let's have a chat or video call, or you drop in and check in on that person. When you're doing that type of thing, you will notice that the person perhaps will be a little bit more receptive to that. And rather than let's jump the gun and talk about the issue right away, you want to approach it with compassion and love by being a listener. So being a good listener to that person and connecting to them that way, giving them the grounds to feel trust to open up and talk to you. Whereas if you right away jump to talking about the obvious, they may not engage in that. So slowly talking to them in a compassionate manner, showing that you're a good listener and not judging and being the haram police. If they come to you and say they've had suicidal thoughts, for example, or they've had any type of thing that could be considered haram, you can't go to the person and say what you're doing is haram. They're not going to come to you. They're not going to trust you. None of that. What you want to be able to do is create an environment of trust and safety for that person. So if you are the one going to them, then you have to be delicate in how you're going to bring up the topic. You can say, oh, I've noticed this, or I've noticed that type of thing, right? And talk about the symptoms of what you've noticed rather than what you think it is right away. I think people, when I say this a lot also when I do my discussions, is to look at the language that we use. People are more receptive to talking about, oh, I've noticed this or that, or you're not going to work, or you're not doing as well here, or you haven't come to the Hussainiyah, blah, blah, blah. When you use this type of language, perhaps the person's more likely to open up and talk rather than saying, you look depressed. Are you suicidal? Ooh, right away, it's hard to deal with. So using the language, I think, can really help people open up to get the discussion going, and saying, hey, I can come with you to the appointment. Let's go talk to your doctor. Let's do that. Or let's go talk to your family together. Or so showing support that I'll be there with you. Don't take on the role itself, because it's hard to do that unless you're a trained counselor. Yeah. Even that, even a lot of my friends, if they come to me, I will refer them to professional help, because I will be there as a friend to support, but I'm not going to do the counseling with them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So relating to the parents' question that we've just discussed, someone was like, if someone has suffered through trauma and abusive relationships with their parents, how are they to try and get rid of their resentment for their circumstances?
Definitely the therapeutic process can help you work through that. It's not an overnight thing. When we take a look at that, especially my Muslim counselors, colleagues, and I, what we try to use in the therapy is an understanding of compassion around the parents, in the sense that, and I'm not making excuses, again, this is not for abusive parents. That's a different thing. That's a really hard thing. And I know people struggle for years with this. It's not an overnight thing that you can just get over. It's not like that. You want to be able to work through these challenges to come to a place of love and forgiveness, perhaps, and if not forgiveness, acceptance of the situation, but not allowing the pain of the past to overwhelm and overtake you, right? So that's when you go through the therapeutic process, it can really help you work through that pain to come to an understanding of perhaps this is all they knew. This was their best. Perhaps they've made a mistake and they realize that, or perhaps they've made mistakes, but they're not going to acknowledge that. Everybody's situation is going to be different, right? But again, I encourage you to go through the therapeutic process. The counselor, if they're a good therapist, they can really help you work through that pain and reframe that resentment in a way where it doesn't overtake you. It's hard sometimes to forgive, and especially from an Islamic perspective where we are expected to show love and respect to our parents no matter what. And that's hard. So especially if there's abuse, that's hard. And so this is where I would say you combined need to talk to a scholar as well as a therapist to get, because every situation is different. I can't give general advice, but talk to a scholar that you trust as well as a therapist to see what is the best way to work through this, because abuse is abuse. At the same time, family, parents, obligations, we have to know exactly like how to work through it in a healthy way, inshallah.
Inshallah. Someone messaged me privately. When we're considering marriage, what would your advice be on thinking about our marriage without having our mental health issues sorted? So is it wiser to heal yourself before you consider marriage, or could you like enter your marriage with your issues unsorted?
We all have issues, my friend. Everybody has some kind of baggage and issues. We do not come into a marriage with a clean slate. Whether we have never been married before or we have, we're all going to have something that we come into from our past childhood traumas and experiences as young adults. We all come with something when we come to marriage. I don't say, oh yes, do this or do that. Everybody's experience is going to be different. What I will say is look at the person that you are marrying. Are they going to be somebody who will be part of your journey to God? Because I think we've lost sight of marriage these days in terms of what is the end goal of marriage. Why do people marry? Just for the sake of having kids, just for, financial ties, just for name, just for, if you look at the basics of what marriage is in our Islamic perspective, there's a goal for that, because with that partner, you are going towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If you come in with psychological trauma from your past, you want to see if this person is going to be able to help you in that journey, meaning they're not there to heal you. It's not their job to heal you. That's your job with your therapist in your own journey. However, like I said, we all have some kind of trauma, some kind of experience, some kind of baggage, some kind of anything that we bring into the marriage. Of course, that's normal. But the person that you're marrying, are they going to be somebody that can walk with you in that journey towards God, to get closer to God? That's how I would answer that question. It can be very difficult if you are not the right fit with each other, that this will go against you very quickly when you're with somebody who doesn't understand your triggers, who's not compassionate to your past and your mental state. Some people don't understand mental health, so they're not going to be in a position to be a supportive partner, both male and female. So it's really important, this journey you take on your own in terms of working through the healing, but to find a partner who will be understanding of that, essentially on your goal of what your goal of marriage is. And what our Islamic goal of marriage is essentially to have that partner to walk with towards, to bring you closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Yeah. Someone said, what is the best way to support someone that has or is going through mental health issues that includes self-harm?
So again, they need to have a professional to help them. It is not your role to be their therapist. To support them means to be there for them, listening, right? If they are having a crisis, you are not their therapist or doctor. Help them get the help that they need. Go with them to the hospital, perhaps, but you have to also understand it can be very burdening on you. It can be very heavy on you. It could trigger your own, past trauma if you have had issues. So it's really important, it's delicate, right? That if you can offer support for that person, be there to listen for them, but it can be really too much sometimes for you. So you want to be able to balance that, right? Balance is really key. So you can show support by saying, I really care about you. I want to see you happy. I want to see you work through this, but I'm not the person who's going to be able to do that because I don't have the skill set. I'm not a therapist. However, check out these resources. The Muslim Youth Helpline in the UK. In North America, we have the Nasiha Helpline, right? Look locally to see what you have. I can come with you to the doctor. I love you so much. I care about you. You know, I can listen once in a while, but I'm not a therapist. And I think we need to look at that as the next option. So that's something that you can show support if you can't take on the burden of listening all the time, because sometimes it's really heavy listening to other people's trauma. That's why as therapists, we also have to be careful and set boundaries around ourselves as well. And because it's very heavy work, we burn out. In fact, it takes 2 to 3 years. People get into this work, burn out, and they leave this work. I've been doing this for 13 years now. And it can be very heavy. And I've learned over the years to set my boundaries, whether it's from the workplace or this volunteer work that I do, my activism work in the community, because it can be very heavy. I try to answer questions for people. I try to refer people because I don't do private practice. I work in a medical clinic at a university with young people. And it's very heavy, 9 to 5 every day, you know, doing this kind of work. I love it, don't get me wrong. But I also noticed over the years that I burnt out and crashed. And I took time off and I rejuvenated and followed the advice that I give to people. I wouldn't have lasted this long. I tell you, people don't last in this profession long if they don't do what they advise people. If you don't follow the advice that you give out to people, first of all, you're being a hypocrite. And second, especially when it comes to your well-being, if you don't follow through these things, you're going to burn out yourself. So I advise this for my young friends out there who, and my other friends who find themselves in a position where you are supporting another person, you also have to take care of yourself. Sometimes we have no choice if we're living with somebody. Perhaps you have parents who are fighting and your dad or your mom come to you and talk to you about the issue. That is a common thing I see a lot with young people. I know you love your parents and you don't want to choose between the two, but it's not fair for you as a child to hear these problems that they put upon you. Perhaps they have nobody else to talk about too, but it's really important that they speak with the right people, age appropriate as well, to get the professional help that they need to get them through this difficult time. You are not your parents' therapist. You can be support and tell them, I love you, I care about you, I want you to be happy. To your parents, I'm going to find the right support for you, but I cannot do this for you. I am not your therapist, right? So there's gentle ways of saying that. You take care of your self-care as well while supporting and loving others.
All right. There are a lot of people sending me privately. I'm so sorry if it's over time, but this one girl, she's like, what are the ways to accept yourself or make someone accept the way that they are?
Acceptance, huh? Go listen to my acceptance lecture. Again, this is a process. It's not an overnight thing. I think a lot of people struggle with their self-image, their self-esteem, sense of who they are, because we don't accept. And it comes down to self-esteem. I will share with you a resource. I have my counseling resources here. Just a moment. I don't see the book in front of me. Of course, it's not here when I want it. I want to show you a book that I use with my clients when it comes to, here it is. When it comes to working on acceptance, and this book here, if you see it. Yeah. So it's called The Self-Esteem Workbook by Glenn Schiraldi. You see how I've used this book over the years, huh? I use this again and again with my clients. And I think this is one of the really great books where it looks at liking yourself, conquering self-doubts, because I think the lack of acceptance comes from self-doubt. It comes from a lack of understanding of seeing our core worth. So this helps you look at that as well. Rational thinking, body appreciation, because this is a big thing for women and men too, but I find more so with ladies in terms of our lack of appreciation for our bodies and not liking the way that we look, perhaps, right? It takes a look at affirming thoughts, enlarging possibilities, forgiving yourself, loving meditation, and liking the face in the mirror. And there's lots of exercises in this book. I highly recommend it, where it takes a look at how we work through these challenges of learning to accept, because the core base of the ideas here when it comes to acceptance is that we are constantly comparing ourselves to external factors. Our worth is connected to the external factors, such as what? The way we look, our background, who we are, our family, our grades, or any of these types of things. And the idea here is that your core worth is completely independent of these external factors. This helps you work with acceptance. So it builds idea upon idea. This is the basic idea of the core worth concept. And building upon that, then we can take a look at, right? Even though I didn't do well in school or in this test, even though I tripped and fell, even though, pick anything in your mind that kind of makes you feel bad about yourself. So you say, even though, and it's an activity in this book that we work on, it's a therapeutic strategy. Even though ABC, nevertheless, I am a beautiful person. I am a person of value. I am a person of worth. Now, if we take this a step further from an Islamic perspective, which will also help answer that question earlier, our worth is dependent upon what? Our relationship to God subhanahu wa ta'ala. None of these external materialistic factors. This is a work in progress, my sisters, right? It's not an overnight thing. So I highly recommend this tool. You can find it online as well. You can order it online, work on it online. You can find it in Chapters, Indigo, those types of bookstores as well. And it's a beautiful workbook to have to work through. It also talks about a lot of things I already discussed in terms of how to take care of your stress, care, self-care, eating, sleeping, exercise. So these are all your basic core things that I highly recommend people work on. And it's the building blocks for the rest of this work when it comes to building your sense of self, acceptance, and your core worth.
All right, Jazakallah, just two more questions and we'll end it. I'm really sorry. So someone asked, how do you deal with overthinking, which prevents you from sleeping as well? Like, the thoughts that we get before going to bed. How do you deal with that?
How do you deal with, can you repeat that?
How do you deal with overthinking, which prevents you from sleeping, like the constant thoughts that you have before going to bed?
So again, with everything that we talked about, it's normal sometimes before bed you're thinking about a lot of things that you need to do the next day or difficulties that you're in. And so the author, do you want to, I'll type it out as I'm speaking. So when it comes to bedtime overthinking, I always recommend creating a healthy sleeping pattern before you go to bed and routine. So the idea here is when you want to create healthy sleeping patterns, that includes relaxation before you go to bed, right? So so you're not going to be watching like Ertugrul before you go to bed. I actually stopped watching that show, that Turkish show of the warriors there, Ertugrul, because there's so much violence. I found my heart rate was just going quite up. And I found myself needing to watch something else or doing something else calmly before going to bed. It put me in such a state. So it caused a lot of anxiety, I noticed, right? The heart rate going, shaking a little bit, just very alert. What you want to do before bed is slow things down, right? You want to use the bedroom for sleep, relaxation. You don't want to be, I know all of us are probably have to study there as well, but you want to create a safe space in the room for bed, create like low lights kind of thing, right? Taking a nice warm shower before going to bed, if it's possible, slows down the heart rate as well and cools you. And it also helps drinking calming stuff. So no caffeine before bed. Although I know some people, caffeine doesn't impact them. And I'm one of those people, I cannot do caffeine. I have to be really careful day and night. I love my chai. I have my own chai that I make, and I'm using decaf tea, and I use everything else like with chai karak and Kashmiri chai and all that. Oh, I love those, but
Love
I
that.
make it my own way. Yeah. I love my coffees and cappuccinos, and oh, I love them all. But same with decaf, same taste. Although a lot of people will argue, and I'm like, no, it's exactly the same. I've done a trial test where I would do that with people in terms of, hey, check out here this chai that I made, and then they would drink it and they would know that I actually made it from decaf. It tastes the same. So it's really important to be able to create healthy bedtime routines. And I find like when you actually do a proper nighttime routine before going to sleep, it will help quite a bit when you are dealing with ruminating thoughts. Of course, relaxation music can help, deep breathing, listening to certain du'as, recitations, favorite latmiyas these days, favorite relaxing Quran recitations. There's a really great one by Sheikh Tablawi, Surah Al-Hashr. It's exquisite. It's absolutely beautiful. If you listen to things like that before bedtime, I think it can really distract your thoughts in a healthier way than all the negative things that you're thinking about. Writing things down can also help as well. There's certain du'as, I don't know at the top of my head right now, but there are certain du'as that you can recite before going to bed that can really help as well. Doing some progressive muscle tension, relaxation techniques and breathing before you go off to bed. Having some scents around you. I have the scent of the Haram of Imam Hussain with me. I always smell that before I go to bed. And that just
Wow.
listening to the shrines, that helps so much. So each of us are so different in terms of how we can do certain things to lower these anxieties before we go to bed. We just have to find different ways. Writing and journaling, grateful, doing gratefulness, gratitude journal. So writing things down like that before you go to bed can have a long, like a really good impact on helping you when you are having all these negative thoughts.
All right, yeah, Jazakallah for that. And someone said, talking about stress, universities are about to start, which are going to add the stress of our performance onto what's already going on. So, we can often confuse perfectionism for excellence, and that affects us adversely. Now, Islam as well recommends us to always aim higher. So can you please shed some light on perfectionism and how to deal with it while still staying on the top of your game?
My sisters, that's a whole lecture on its own. So I'll be brief, but it's a very excellent question. So we have to understand there is no such thing as perfect. Huh? There's no such thing as perfect. There is no such thing as perfectionism. Why? Why do you suppose that is?
Maybe because it's I think for us as humans as well, like I think we have a limit to what we can achieve, maybe, and maybe that's reserved for the Masumins, to be perfect, in my opinion.
Yeah, there you're on the right line. So when we talk about perfectionism, and I say there's no such thing as perfect, there is no such thing as perfect, because perfection, kamal, belongs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And you brought up the point of the ma'sumin, bless you. So what we want to be constantly doing is striving towards that perfectionism by doing our absolute best, right? Again, using the examples laid out to us by the Prophet and the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam in terms of the goodness that we do in our lives, whether it's the spiritual rituals and perfecting rather, and working towards refining ourselves, right? When it comes to perfectionism in schoolwork, this is something constant that I see in my line of work. And again, we focus on the ideas of doing your absolute best. Doing your absolute best. What? In what though? Doing your absolute best in terms of the circumstances that you are under right now. What do I mean by that? So, doing your absolute best given your circumstances, okay, today, let's say, could be quite different than your circumstances yesterday, last week, or in the future. Because it could be that you're not in a pandemic. You're in a pandemic right now, and that is impacting your ability to study, especially if you're virtual, or your interaction with your colleagues and your students and peers. So given your circumstances, do your absolute best. Reach out to the supports in your university, student support services, the health and counseling support services that you have. If you are a student with academic challenges or disabilities, use the supports that you have in place to get accommodation. Absolutely. I think a lot of students don't look at the services they have available to help them reach their full potential. Again, there's no such thing as perfect. You do your absolute best, right? And that is the jihad, that's the struggle of a student. That is your form of ibadah as well, right?
Yeah. But how do you know when you're doing your absolute best? Like, is there a criteria for that?
I wouldn't necessarily say there's a criteria. I think we need to understand, like, don't kid yourself. Don't kid yourself. If you are wasting your time on social media, if you are playing, if you are not doing your work, you know when you're not doing your work. But there's also a defined line of sometimes where people are experiencing mental health issues that are preventing them from reaching their full help. This is where you go and get the support that you need to help you work on these issues to reach your full potential, inshallah.
Inshallah. Jazakallah for that, sister. And to end it off, someone asked for your chai recipe, if you're comfortable sharing that with us.
Yes, let's do that. So chai recipe. I'm going to record this and share it as well as we're speaking.
Yeah.
All right, so you want to know my chai recipe, the decaf. So I use any black decaf tea, all right? Just make your regular tea, steep it. But what you want to do also is use cinnamon, nutmeg, ginger, cardamom. That's the key ingredient. You can use saffron in there, and I use honey. And I add a dash of turmeric as well, because that's also an antioxidant and an immunity booster, just a little bit. And all of these combined together, somebody also mentioned basil to me, a friend of mine. When you combine all these together and have them with some type of milk that you like, it could be dairy, non-dairy, it's very rich and soothing and comforting, right? And this is also a relaxation, part of your relaxation technique. And, you know, I'm always traveling with some kind of one of these, whether it's water, and I use this on the Arba'in walk as well. And I find it's so nice to be able to have something comforting like that, especially in stressful times, right? Lowering your caffeine intake can go a long way in lowering your stress and anxiety levels, because it just pumps your heart up, and you don't want to be in that position, right? And for those of you who are going on the Arba'in walk, anybody going?
Inshallah, one of my family members, inshallah, because I've heard that there are certain restrictions, right, for international people, for the walk as well. So inshallah, pray that we're gonna, pray that the paths are open for all of us to go, inshallah.
We also have to be very careful, because going to Arba'in this year may not be the best thing and best of interest for the locals and for us coming back. We are still going to be performing the ziyarah, whether we're close or far. And I think it's very important for those who are going on the Arba'in ziyarah to be very mindful and very careful. But I think it's really important. We need to discuss and explore this this year. It's, we can do the ziyarah from far. And I think it might be selfish perhaps for us insisting on wanting to go, as we don't know what the dangers are for us to catching this and potentially spreading it to others and coming back to our home country. So we have to be really mindful of that. I think the ziyarah is a beautiful part of what we honor these days, and it's something that's very close and dear to my heart. And for those who are going, please remember us in your du'as, but also be very mindful, right? Perhaps it's better to stay and do your ziyarah from far than go in the pandemic that we are in and hurt and impact the locals as well as people back home. So we have to be really mindful and aware of that, inshallah.
Inshallah, right. So before we end, does anyone like to say something, add something, ask something?
Yeah, Assalamu alaikum. I just wanted to ask, so you know how you mentioned the ziyarat point, right? A lot of people have this thing that, basically when you go for ziyarat, basically the imam is calling you, right? It's an invitation from the imam. And for people who don't get to go, I'm sure it's not like the imam didn't want to call you. Sometimes, there are reasons as to why the imam would want you to stay in that particular place and not come for ziyarah. Maybe you could help someone during that time. So could you maybe elaborate more on that, if that's okay?
I would say a sheikh would be in a better position, or a alima, to answer that in terms of imam calling you or not. I can give you my personal opinion. That's different, but it's not like I would talk to a sheikh or an alima on that. But essentially it is that the imam is calling you, perhaps, again, this is my perspective, when the time is right for you, when it's best for you. I know for 13 years I didn't go to Iraq. My circumstances did not allow me. And I don't believe it's because the imam didn't want me to come. But I was in a place where I wasn't ready to come. And when my circumstances changed and I made the changes that I needed to in my life, that's when it was the right time for me to go. Do you see the difference? I don't believe it's because the imam doesn't want you to come or you're not worthy of it. I believe truly, when that time is right. And I think we truly have to be mindful of that. Some people are going to the ziyarah, some are not this year, right? And in general, like I said, you need to ask a scholar or alima to get into the specifics of this. I'm giving you my personal opinion from my experience. I don't think it's because the imam doesn't want you to come. I think it's because the time is not right for you to come. Perhaps your personal circumstances. Like I said, for over 13 years, I couldn't go back to my country to do the ziyarah. And I don't think it was because the imam didn't want me to, because I did so much here that I was able to do in honor of the imam, but the time wasn't right for me. So it's very individual, I would have to say about that.
Thank you. Jazakallah. Thank you for the session, by the way. It's brilliant. Thank you.
My pleasure, my dear sisters. And thank you so much. And inshallah, we can do this again and have discussions and really being able to rejuvenate our souls and our energy. And especially these days, like today, that we're holding majalis for Sayyidah Ruqayya alayhi salam in honor of her. It is her shahada these days. Every single day these days, we truly have to be mindful. Just because the first 13 days of Muharram are over, it doesn't mean it's time to party. It's time to enjoy and party, and you know what I mean. But when I say that, these are the days in history that we are honoring of what happened to Sayyidah Zainab alayhi salam and the ladies that were captive with her, and Imam Sajjad alayhi salam. These days are still days of reflection. These days are days of inspiration for us to revive our spirits and our souls as we head into Arba'in and beyond. So it's so important that every day we look back into history to see what's happening. Inshallah, in honor of Sayyidah Ruqayya, these days we can be inspired by the story and give honor to the pain that she experienced in the days leading up to Arba'in, inshallah.
Inshallah, Jazakallah so much. We appreciate your time, the efforts that you put into the session. All the comments here as well are appreciating you. Jazakallah, inshallah, hopefully we can, have you again. It was very beneficial for us. And may Allah bless you. May the Ahl Bayt call you for their ziyarah, if not physically, but they say as well, you just have to see him with your heart. It's not like you can see it. It's not only that with your eyes you have to see him. So inshallah, all of us get the opportunity for seeing the imam, having the ziyarah of the imam from our hearts, from the eyes of our hearts, inshallah. May God bless everyone that's here. Inshallah, next time we'll get benefit from you as well. Jazakallah so much, sister.
Sister. Khadafis. Take care. Iltimaz ad-du'a. Khadafis. Assalamu alaikum.